Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Luffy ate fruit and become fallen angel part 1. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support the Mr. Indigo for writing that awesome fanfic and also make sure to comment on this story, link in the description. Let's start this video. Cruise ship was traveling across the sea known as East Blue. The water was currently calm and there was not a cloud in the sky. The passengers were doing quite well and were currently having a gala in the ship's large ballroom. But the nice piece was not to last as the cruise ship was attacked by the Alvita pirates, led by the small whale Alvita herself. Within a few minutes the small amount of marines that were guarding the ship were defeated and hogtied, and the ship was being ruthlessly looted. Koby, who is the most beautiful woman on all the seas. A round ball of fat known as Alvita shouted to a small pink-haired boy who immediately froze and started stuttering. "Why that would be you, LL Lady Alvita." He whimpered as he looked at Alvita, fear evident on his face. Alvita smirked, happy that Koby was still extremely scared of her. But Anne's Alvita started to say, only to have something hit the back of her head extremely hard, causing her to fly forward and smash face first into the deck. The Alvita pirates and Koby were absolutely speechless. One moment their captain was standing there proudly, and the next she is lying face first on the deck with a boy standing on her head. Now, the boy was around 17 years old, still a teenager. He was tall and lanky and had a straw hat with a red ribbon perched on his head. The boy wore a rest vest, shorts and sandals, but the weirdest part about the boy was that he covered head to toe in blood-red runes. He had a large toothy smile on his face as he chuckled and had dark grey wings that had the appearance of decaying that came out of his back. Shishishi. That was fun. I want to do that again. The mysterious teenager said as he laughed. After a while he stopped laughing and looking down he saw that he was on Alvita's face. Oh no. I killed a baby whale. The boy screamed as he jumped off of Alvita's face. One of the Alvita pirates, finally snapping out of his shock, took his sword and held it to the mysterious teenager's throat and said, "Hey boy, do you know who you're dealing with?" "Nope." The boy replied immediately, causing all of the Alvita pirates to sweat drop. "We are the Alvita pirates, led by the notorious Iron Mace Alvita." "How do you not know who we are?" The pirate who held the sword to the boy's throat yelled. "Oh, so you guys are pirates?" The boy said happily with a large smile on his face, before it suddenly turned to one of confusion. "Wait a minute, if you guys are pirates, then where is your captain?" All eyes turned to look at Alvita, who was still laying unconscious on the deck. The unnamed teenager, curious as to what all of the pirates were looking at, turned around and saw that they were staring at the body of that baby whale he knocked out earlier. "Oh, so that's your captain." The boy yelled happily, only to have a confused look back onto his face after a few seconds. "Hey, could I ask you guys something?" The boy asked, only getting a nod from the pirate who was holding a sword to his throat, which was now at his side, to continue with his question. "Why is your captain a baby whale?" Two of the Alvita pirates, infuriated that this no-name brat had insulted their captain, charged at him with their swords drawn and swung downwards at the boy's neck, fully intending to decapitate him. However, when their swords made contact with the boy's throat, the metal blades both snapped in half and fell onto the deck with a clang. All of the Alvita pirates' eyes widened a considerable degree, completely flabbergasted and shocked at what they were seeing. The boy's neck was covered in midnight black scales, which scared the two pirates whose swords broke shitless. "You know, those things are dangerous, you should be careful where you swing those things," the boy said as he smiled evilly at the two pirates, who both started sweating profusely and became as white as a sheet. What the hell are you?" the two pirates yelled, quickly going back to cowering under the straw hat, wearing teen's gaze. "Who, me?" the boy said, blinking in shock before smiling widely and said, "I'm Monkey D. Luffy." "Pirate." The Alvita pirates were shocked at the boy's, whose name was now confirmed as Luffy, answer. They never would have thought that this teenager was a pirate. In fact, they actually believed that the boy was a secret marine project nobody knew about. "So you're a pirate, huh?" came a wheezy and weak voice from behind Luffy. He turned around to see Alvita getting up off the ground, looking cockily at him. "Yeah, I am. By the way, how are you feeling, baby whale? I hope I didn't hurt you too badly." The Alvita pirates and Koby stared at Luffy in utter shock, believing he was batshit insane for insulting Alvita. Alvita, however, had steam coming out of her ears, she was so mad. How dare this boy insult her? She was the great Captain Alvita, and no one insulted her and lived to tell about it. "You just insulted me." Alvita yelled furiously at him. "I didn't insult you, Alvita," Luffy said as he smirked at her. "I was just pointing out the obvious. You look like a baby whale, end of story." Now there was a murderous aura coming from Alvita in waves. However, Luffy didn't seem to notice and in fact totally ignored her. She pulled out her iron club and swung it at Luffy with all her might, dead set on ending him. However, she wouldn't have her way as her club shattered on contact with Luffy's skull. The same midnight black scales covered the spot Alvita's club impacted. Well, looks like you made the first move, Alvita. Luffy said calmly as he gave her an evil grin, causing Alvita to pale and shiver in fear. Looks like it's my turn. Luffy cocked back his fist and yelled, Oni Bigubin, Demon Bang. Punching Alvita in the gut and sending her flying off into the distance with a black trail of smoke following her. She kept flying until she became a speck in the sky and disappeared. Well, now that that's taken care of, Luffy said casually as he turned back to face the remainder of Alvita's crew, who were currently staring at him with their faces as wide as a sheet with their jaws on the ground and eyes so wide they appeared to be bulging out of their heads. Hey. I need a small ship with plenty of food. Luffy yelled, snapping all of the pirates and Koby out of their shocked stupor, who then quickly got to work preparing a boat and filling it with food as Luffy had ordered, fearing for their lives. Koby was about to go and help them, but was stopped by a hand being placed on his shoulder. Hey kid, the boy said, and when Koby looked up he saw Luffy staring down at him with a happy smile on his face. What's your name? Koby immediately froze and was terrified of the straw hat wearing teenager, but mustering just enough courage he stuttered, my name is CC Koby. Alright then, tell me Koby. Did you willingly join this pirate crew? Koby couldn't believe what he had heard, or how he had heard it for that matter. The voice of the teenager, which was so cold and ruthless 1 minute ago, was now soft and gentle, almost soothing, like a mother speaking to her young child. Koby was shocked by the teen's sudden change of tone, as well as the question he had asked him. Instead of asking him why he wasn't helping or forcing him to join his crew, he asked if he was here of his own free will. Finding a way to get away from the Alvita pirates once and for all, Koby nodded his head furiously from side to side. Shushi Luffy chuckled, amused at the young Pinkette's determined face, then I guess you'll be leaving with me Koby. With that, Luffy set off, sailing away from both the Alvita pirates and the cruise ship, with a small boat filled with food and a pink-haired boy named Koby. However, Luffy failed to notice a certain orange-red woman watching them from afar. Hey Koby, do you have a dream? Luffy asked Koby out of nowhere as he was navigating them to the nearest island, which just so happened to be located in the Itsuba Island region, more specifically, Shell's town. That Koby said, blinking in surprise. No one had ever asked him that particular question before. What do you mean by that, Luffy? I mean, what do you want to do with your life? Luffy explained plainly, not putting any emotion into his voice. Well, I want to be a marine. Koby quickly said without thinking, only to slap his hands over his mouth and stare at Luffy in fear, realizing that he just said he wanted to be a marine in front of the most powerful pirate he had ever known. He was probably going to kill him now, since anybody in or planning to be in the Marines were automatically a pirate's mortal enemy. Instead of the reaction Koby was fearing, all Luffy did was sit down, shut his eyes, open his mouth, and say in a bored tone, a marine huh? Well, good luck with that Koby. Koby's mouth fell open in shock. Did he just wish him good luck in becoming a marine? He wasn't going to kill him, even though he was going to become the one thing that pirates hated the most. This was insane. Koby just couldn't understand this straw hat wearing teenager at all. Wait, so you're not going to kill me? Koby squeaked out without thinking once again. Luffy raised an eyebrow directed towards Koby with his eyes still closed and asked plainly, kill you? Why would I kill you? Well, because I am going to become a marine and end up fighting you one day. Luffy did nothing for a few moments, just sitting there. But then, he started laughing, staring out with a quiet chuckle before getting louder and louder until it was a full-out laughing fit. Now, Koby didn't understand the exact reasoning for why Luffy was currently laughing, but it must have had something to do with what he just said. What is so funny, Luffy? Koby asked with a scared and confused tone. Oh, nothing much really, it's just that you think you will fight me someday. It's hilarious. Luffy replied cheerfully before he broke down into another fit of giggles. Well, Koby was currently at a loss of words. Deciding that he didn't want to try delving any more into the insane mind of Luffy, Koby instead decided that he would ask Luffy a question of his own. Hey Luffy, do you have your own dream? At this Luffy immediately perked up, the red runes on his body starting to glow a little as a large, excited smile worked its way onto his face. I am going to find One Piece and become the Pirate King. Luffy yelled out happily and excitedly as the decaying grey wings, which seemingly had disappeared when they had departed from Alvita's ship, popped out of his back and sparkled a little in the sunlight. Koby's eyes grew wide, and a look of utter shock became plastered onto his face. Why you mean you're going to go into the place known as the Pirate's Graveyard? Koby yelled in shock, only getting a nod confirming his suspicions. Luffy, you know that there are thousands of pirates trying to find One Piece as well, right? Yeah, so? Luffy said both happily and calmly, a small smile still on his face. There may be many pirates trying to find One Piece, but I'm going to be the first one to actually find it. But it's impossible, Koby said, staring at Luffy in disbelief as his brain began shutting down, unable to comprehend the straw hat wearing teen's words. Only his mouth continued moving, repeated the same word over and over, impossible, impossible, impossible. Hey Koby, could you stop saying that? Luffy asked after a few moments. However, Koby didn't stop his repetition, which only added to Luffy's ever-growing irritation. Koby, could you please knock it off? Luffy repeated with a little more force and irritation mixed within his voice, his smile that was on his face now gone, replaced with an impassive facade that hid the irritation in his voice. Koby however did not stop, not able to hear Luffy's warning. Stop it. Luffy shouted as he punched Koby right in the face. However, he punched him a little too hard since he immediately fell over, unconscious. Oops, I seem to have broken him, Luffy said sheepishly as he scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. However, his embarrassment didn't last long as he saw something floating in the water. I wonder what that is. Luffy said curiously before spreading out his grey wings and flying over to the dark lump in the water. What Luffy discovered was a surprise, to say the least. It was a young woman, probably around his age, laying on a large piece of driftwood which was able to keep her afloat. Blood stained the driftwood, its point of origin being a large gash in her chest starting from her left breast and ending at her right hip. She had lost a lot of blood and her face was pale and her breath shallow and raspy. Luffy knew that if she didn't get help soon she was going to die. Luffy grabbed the young woman and carrying her in his arms, flew back to the small ship he and Koby were using and laid her down gently. He then began searching frantically for a first aid kit. Luffy knew he had brought one with him, it was just a matter of finding the damn thing. After a while Luffy finally discovered the first aid kit, which was placed underneath a barrel of apples for some strange reason. Luffy removed a needle and thread and began sewing the large gash on the young woman's chest shut. Afterward he cleaned the wound to make sure it didn't get infected and then wrapped the newly stitched wound in the young woman's chest with a roll of gauze. Luffy wiped the sweat off his brow as he sat down on one of the thwarts in the small boat. He might be incompetent and irrational at times, but if there was one thing Luffy ever had the decency to learn, it would be the basics of medicine. Of course, he only learned how to properly sew a large cut shut, how to clean a wound and how to bandage a wound, hence the words basics. He didn't bother learning anything else about medicine, since cuts and gashes were the most common injury on the sea, or at least they were according to Luffy's logic. However, Luffy's lack of medical knowledge didn't matter at this point though, he had just saved someone's life, and that was what actually mattered to him. Luffy turned to look at the young woman whose life he had saved just minutes ago, taking in more of her details. She had a blue t-shirt on, although the main torso of the shirt was covered with one of Luffy's spare red vests, since there was a large gash in her shirt from where she was cut, which exposed both of her assets clear as day, not that it mattered to him though. Luffy never really had an interest in them, since he always thought that women should be judged by their personality, not their bust size or attractiveness. However, he wanted to make sure they were covered, since if she were to wake up and discover that her assets were uncovered, he would be beat senseless and be labeled as a pervert, of which he definitely was not. She was young, Luffy knew that for sure. If he were to estimate her age, he would say she was the same age as him. She had a slim and curved figure, one of which would put most supermodels to shame and have most men chase after her, having fallen head over heels in love immediately after laying their eyes on her. Somehow, the thought of any other male chasing after this young woman irritated Luffy, though he didn't know why since he didn't even know her yet. Luffy shook his head violently, removing any of those negative thoughts out of head and instead focused his attention to her face. She had dark blue hair which went down to her hips, although it was currently splotched with crimson blood. Luffy sighed as he grabbed a small metal 1-quart cup and dipped it into the sea around him, filling the cup up with water. He laid the metal cup next to him on the thwart and lifting up the woman and moved her, so only the upper half of her head was hanging over the side of the dinghy. He took the metal cup and poured the water into the woman's hair and ran his finger through it, washing the blood out of her dark blue locks. It took about 20 minutes of hard work until the young woman's dark blue hair was finally cleaned of blood and dirt. Luffy, after breathing a sigh of relief, happy to not be washing the young woman's hair anymore, lifted the still sleeping woman into his arms and relocated her into a more comfortable position within the small dinghy. Luffy, after making sure that the young woman was both comfortable and not in danger of falling overboard if the ship hit a large wave, laid down on the deck of the small dinghy and closed his eyes and muttered, "Akuma can." Demon sense. An invisible wave was released from Luffy, which allowed him to sense every living life form within a 1500-meter radius. From the birds that flew overhead to the fish that swam underneath the waves, he could feel them all. Luffy let a small smile grace his features, enjoying the peaceful calm he was currently feeling. Doing this helped him feel relaxed and comfortable. He believed there was another name people called the power he was currently using. He believed it was called Kenbun-shoku haki, but he couldn't really be sure of that. After all, he was a demon, and demons didn't use the same forms of techniques as humans. He could sense Koby regain consciousness an hour later and smiling as he opened his eyes said, "Have a good nap Koby." Koby immediately jolted upward and with his body tensing up, quickly looked around at his surroundings. When his eyes landed on Luffy, his body relaxed and a look of thankfulness was formed upon his face. "Oh, thank God it was only you, Luffy." Koby then exclaimed, "I thought I was back on Alvita's flagship." At this, Luffy immediately started laughing, albeit confusing Koby on the reason why he was laughing. "Hey Koby, do you why you got knocked out?" Luffy asked a curious Pinkett a few moments later, to which Koby nodded his head in denial. Luffy snickered again as he pointed to his own forehead and said bluntly, "Well, the reason you were knocked out, Koby, was because I bopped you on the head, albeit a little too hard, I might add." Koby's face turned into one of shock as he stuttered out, why would you hit me?" "Because you said that accomplishing my dream was impossible," Luffy replied bluntly, causing Koby's face to turn a ghastly white in fear of what he was going to do to him for speaking out against his dream like that. Instead, Luffy only chuckled and said, "Shishishi, you're a very funny child, you know the Koby." Koby was shocked once again at Luffy's seemingly careless attitude and shouted, "You are truly insane. It is clearly impossible to find One Piece, Luffy, but yet you still insist on trying to find it. I know I just met you and have no right to order you around, but I don't want you to die a premature death." Luffy snorted at that and said, "Let me give you a little advice, Koby." Luffy then stood up, making Koby's eyes widen as he began to shiver in fear, thinking that he was either going to get hit or be killed. Luffy did neither of them and only pointed at Koby and yelled happily, "Koby, if I die, I die, but at least I will have died trying to accomplish my dream." Koby sat looking awestruck at Luffy, feeling inspired by his steeled resolve and dead-set motivation. "I wonder if I can be like that." Koby whispered as Luffy sat back down within the dingy, "I wonder if I can live without any doubts, confidently fulfilling my ambitions." Luffy only shrugged and replied, "There is no reason why you can't, Koby." Koby's fists were clenched and started shaking. "I have a dream, Luffy," he whispered, "it's nowhere near as amazing as yours, but I wonder if I can do it." Koby looked up to meet the focused gaze of Luffy, who was chuckling softly. "Koby, your dream is just as amazing as mine, even though you want to become a marine. Go for it, Koby." Luffy shouted encouragingly as he pumped his fist into the air excitingly. However, Luffy's comment fell on mostly deaf ears as Koby continued on ranting as if he'd been discouraged, which Luffy thought was hilarious. "No. I will do it. I will become a marine. A great marine who follows the code of justice to the end. And I will stop pirates from wreaking havoc on the innocent." Koby suddenly shouted out of nowhere, determination sparkling in his eyes. The large wide smile worked its way onto Luffy's face as he asked, "Does that include me as well, Koby?" Koby's eyes widened in fear and worry for a moment before determination flooded back into them stronger than before. Koby stood up and looking Luffy straight in the eyes, took a deep breath and shouted, "Even you, Luffy. It doesn't matter if you saved me from Alvita or not. If you dare hurt any innocent people, I will capture you." After Koby yelled this, Luffy burst out laughing and replied, "There it is, Koby. There is that fearless determination you were lacking before." Luffy continued laughing for a minute or two, not saying anything as Koby came out of his sudden burst of courage and determination and stared slack-jawed at what Luffy had just said. When Luffy calmed himself down, he said, "Koby, you will be a great marine. I know it. The fact that you stood up to me is proof enough of that." Koby looked at Luffy in awe, happy that this young teenager who Koby considered a friend by this point was encouraging his dream of becoming a marine. "By the way, Luffy, who is that?" Koby said after a minute of silence, pointing at the young woman who was sleeping silently on the deck of the small dinghy. "Oh, her?" Luffy said, turning to look at where Koby was pointing before smiling warmly, "I found her." "Found her? What is that supposed to mean?" Koby shouted, worried that Luffy had kidnapped her. "Exactly what it means, Koby. I found her floating on a large piece of driftwood with a large gash in her chest. So I brought her aboard our small boat and patched up her wound. I hope there's nothing wrong with helping someone, Koby." No. Of course not, Luffy." Koby quickly said, waving his arms out in front of him quickly, "I just thought you kidnapped her." "Kidnap?" Luffy said darkly as his hat shadowed his eyes, "Koby, I may be a pirate, but I would never kidnap or even take advantage of a defenseless woman. It would be against my morals as a man to do so." Koby stared at Luffy slack-jawed, knowing that if Luffy never blatantly admitted to being a pirate, Koby would have probably confused him with being either a marine or bounty hunter, due to the fact that all the pirates Koby had the pleasure of knowing never held a moral like that and would definitely jump at the chance to have a little fun with a defenseless woman. Koby shuddered as he recalled one of the many unpleasant memories that he witnessed during his time as Alvita's cabin boy before calming down and saying, "So, who is she?" "Don't know, she was already unconscious when I found her," Luffy replied rather bluntly. Koby only shook his head and decided to ask where they were going. "So Luffy, do you know where we are heading?" "We're heading to the nearest marine base, Koby. I believe it's a place called Shell's Town," Luffy replied calmly. "Shell's Town? I heard that's the place where the pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro was recently arrested at." Koby said randomly, not noticing the way that Luffy perked up at hearing the infamous bounty hunter's name. Hey Koby, do you know if Zoro uses swords or not? Luffy asked, a small smile gracing his lips. What? Of course he uses swords. Koby yelled, Luffy, they don't call him the greatest swordsman in East Blue for nothing. Luffy immediately shot up and whacked the palm of his hand with his fist and yelled, Yosh. I'm going to get him to join my crew. It took a few seconds for the information to sink into Koby's brain before he shrieked, what? Luffy, he's a pirate hunter. He hunts pirates for a living. You'll only get yourself killed if you try and recruit him. Fair point Koby. Luffy asked happily, a large smile still on his face, even if he does refuse, he wouldn't be able to kill me. I'm a lot stronger than him. Besides, I'm pretty sure he'll say yes. Koby stood in shock for a few seconds looking at Luffy before hanging his head down and asked in a low voice, I'm not going to be able to convince you otherwise, am I? Hell no. Luffy yelled, pumping his fist up into the air. Koby looked up and smiled a small but sincere smile and said, I guess there's no use trying to change your opinion on something, huh? Well, I'll go make sure we're actually heading towards Shell's town then. Okay Koby, you do that. I'm just gonna relax here until we get there. Luffy said as he laid down with a small smile still remaining on his face, his eyes looking up at the blue and white sky. Before succumbing to sleep, Luffy looked at the dark-haired beauty sleeping in the dingy, only two last things coming into his mind. Who is she? And where did she come from? She groggily and slowly opened her eyes, only to immediately close them again due to the bright light that immediately filled her vision. She flipped herself over, groaning in pain as her body ached and complained about the simple movement. She once again slowly and groggily opened her eyes, this time succeeding in fully opening them. Looking around at her surroundings, she was surprised to see that she was in a small dingy, as opposed to the dark prison cell of a marine ship of which she previously resided, not that she was complaining. The small dingy was docked on a stone dock, gently bobbing in the waves. She noticed that there was two people standing in front of the docked ship, one being considerably taller than the other. One wore a pair of torn blue shorts with a red vest and a straw hat atop his head and towered over the other. The other person was considerably shorter, with pink hair and a white t-shirt on. She didn't know who these two people were, but whoever they didn't seem to pose much of a threat to her well-being at the moment, of which she was perfectly fine with. A sudden burst of pain surged within her chest, pulling her out of her thoughts, as she instinctively reached her hand down to the pained area. She felt a fabric covering the pained area on her chest, and when she investigated what it was she was completely surprised to find a red vest covering her chest, which was completely strange to her, since she never remembered having on a red vest, but instead a blue t-shirt, when she was locked in the confines of the marine ship. Making an attempt to unbutton the vest, and only succeeding at getting the first button undone. She saw the reason why the sleeveless red vest was placed over her blue t-shirt. Somehow, a large tear made its home onto her blue t-shirt and would have exposed both of her breasts clear as day if it weren't for both the many layers of gauze and the red vest that covered them. Well, at least one of the two people she had previously seen had the decency to cover up her breasts, although she was going to punch one of them in the face for actually getting a look at them. Well, I guess it didn't really matter where she was or her current situation at the moment, since she didn't seem to be in any imminent danger. Well, that and she was absolutely exhausted and her entire body creaked and ached in pain. She was oh so very tired, and since she didn't seem to be in any imminent danger, what harm could taking a nap do to her? Right. Yacht. I'm so glad we're here in Shell's town. It was getting so boring being cramped up in that small boat. Luffy shouted, stretching his body in all sorts of directions. Shhhhhh. Not so loud Luffy. Koby tried to say in a scolding manner, however, Luffy just ignored him and continued stretching. Why not? It's not like I'm hurting anybody, right Koby? Luffy said as he flashed a sinister grin at the Pincat, who involuntarily shuddered and was suddenly filled with a great sense of fear towards the straw hat wearing teenager. Why yeah, I guess LL Luffy Koby stuttered out. Great. Now, let's head to where Zoro's being held. Luffy said excitedly. You know Luffy, you really shouldn't be so excited, Koby said in a matter-of-factly tone of voice. Oh yeah, well how come, Koby? Luffy asked the Pincat sarcastically, quite annoyed at the young boy's constant attempts to make him drop the idea of getting Zoro to join his crew. In fact, if he were to try and count how many times the easily frightened Pincat had tried to persuade him otherwise it would easily be in the upper 80s. Well Luffy, I heard that people have been calling Zoro a demon in human form, Koby said while shivering a little. The townspeople who had heard what Koby said instantly flinched and began trembling in fear, which only added fuel to Koby when he saw them flinch and said, see Luffy. Even the townspeople agree with me. Zoro is not someone to be trifled with, so let's just leave and not be bothered with this. Luffy, after hearing what the Pincat had to say, immediately had his straw hat cover his eyes so they were shaded by them, and an insane devilish grin covered the entire lower half of his face. soon after he began to laugh. It at first started out as a deep malicious chuckle, but soon gradually started changing and morphing into a higher toned cackle. This absolutely terrified the pink-haired teenager, one part being that he had never heard that type of sound come from Luffy before, and the other being that it sounded absolutely sinister. "Oh Koby, Koby, Koby," Luffy said after at least 2 minutes of continuous laughing, wiping a tear from his eye as he looked down amusingly at the pinkette. "You are such a riot, you little munchkin. And what exactly is so funny about what I said, Luffy?" Koby growled, anger more prevalent than fear in his voice. "Oh, it's quite simple really," Luffy began to reply, stifling a few stray chuckles of laughter. "If Zoro is a demon, then that must mean that I'm an angel." Luffy then immediately burst out laughing again for a good 30 seconds before leaning over to Koby's ear and whispered, "I'm willing to bet that the one in charge here, Captain Morgan, is more of a demon than Roronoa is." After hearing what Luffy had to say, Koby's face turned into one of unadulterated fury as he shouted, "What do you mean that Captain Morgan is more of a demon than Zoro? I'm pretty sure that the bounty hunter is the one locked up, not Captain Morgan." Immediately after saying this, Koby quickly put both hands over his mouth, realizing what he had done, and was filled with an immediate sense of dread and absolute fear of what Luffy was going to do to him because of his outburst. Well, Luffy's reaction was one that both confused him and surprised him, because instead of becoming furious like he thought, the straw hat wearing teenager only smiled a broad smile at him and looked around at the townsfolk. Curious as to what Luffy was looking at, Koby took a look at the townsfolk, and what he saw shocked him to the core. The townspeople, men, women and children alike, had faces that were completely white with fear, and sweat covered their faces. After a few more seconds of staring, the people surrounding them scurried away as fast as they could, as if the devil himself was upon them. It seemed to Koby that saying the Captain Morgan's name instilled an absolute fear within the hearts of the townspeople, even more so than the name Roronoa Zoro, although he didn't understand the reason behind it. "Do you see what I mean, Koby?" Luffy said with an "I told you so" smile plastered on his face. "Captain Morgan is more of a demon to these people more than Zoro is. Otherwise, they wouldn't have reacted like that. But Captain Morgan is a marine. Isn't it his job to protect the people of this island and not scare them?" Koby asked Luffy, desperately wanting an explanation for the townspeople fear of the Navy man. "Well Koby," Luffy said, his face losing all traces of the previous smile and furrowing into a small frown, "that one is quite easy to explain. You see, even though the Marines are supposed to stand for justice and equality, there are still those sinful Marines who use their position of power and abuse to commit either atrocities or just to rule unjustly like a mad and cruel king." Luffy's face contorted once more into a small smirk. "Just remember this, Koby, don't always believe everything you hear. Not all Marines are good and not all pirates are bad. I'm a testament to this, since if I was as bad as people say all pirates are, then you wouldn't be in the land of the living, kid." "I guess I understand, sir," Koby replied meekly, crushed to find out that his dream image of what he thought the Marines were was in fact incorrect. "Whoa, what the hell, Koby?" Luffy shouted in mock anger, making Koby jump and then fear for his life due to him, thinking he did something wrong. "Where the hell did you get sir from? Last time I checked, I'm not an old geezer just yet. I'm only 17 for God's sakes." But this Luffy started to laugh a hearty laugh, and soon enough Koby joined in too, forgetting all about his despair. With this, they continued onward to the 153rd Marine Branch's headquarters. Luffy and Koby soon arrived at a tall stone wall, and Luffy, with his trademark smile plastered on his face, jumped on top of it. Then, looking down at the young pink-haired teenager with a large smirk on his face, he said, "So Koby, how much belly do you want to bet that they're keeping Zoro here in this courtyard?" In a moment of sheer stupidity and not really thinking, Koby responded, "I'm willing to bet 1,000 belly that Roronoa Zoro is not inside the courtyard. Someone that dangerous would probably be kept in a more secure location like a dungeon." "Oh really, Koby?" Luffy replied, the smirk turning into a sly smile and his right eyebrow rising up in amusement and slight shock, surprised at how easy it was to scam money out of the teenager, since he was literally seeing Roronoa Zoro tied up in the middle of the courtyard. He didn't feel even the least bit bad for what he did, nor was he going to worry himself about it. He did just make 1,000 belly after all. He pointed to the man and looking down at Koby said, "Then who's that?" Koby, with a little bit of help from Luffy, climbed up on the wall next to Luffy and said, "Listen Luffy, there is absolutely no way that they would keep him." It was at this moment that Koby noticed the details of the man tied up to a wooden cross in the middle of the courtyard, beaten and malnourished with a green bandana tied around his head. His face turned a ghastly white as he stuttered out, holy sh shit, that's Roronoa Zoro. "See Koby, I told you he would be here." Luffy yelled happily, laughing heartily, which caught the attention of Zoro. "Hey, you two. You're an eyesore, so scram." Zoro yelled at both Koby and Luffy, his voice filled with malice. Of course, him saying this had the desired effect on the pinkette, who was trembling even more furiously in his boots and immediately tried to persuade Luffy that this was definitely a bad idea. However, Luffy just ignored the desperate pleas from the young teen and just snickered for a few moments before giving Zoro a death glare as a black and dark purple mist surrounded him. You know, Roronoa Zoro, I don't usually let anybody order me around. But since you are a future crewmate, I will forgive you for this insubordination. Luffy said with both viciousness and malice in his voice, more than Koby had ever heard come from Luffy's mouth. In fact, it sounded almost demonic. He just stood to quake with a newfound fear of his friend. Hell, Luffy was even able to make the famous swordsman Roronoa Zoro tremble involuntarily in fear with his words. Never before had both the entirety of his body and mind tell him to not honor an agreement that he made and break the bonds that held him and run far away, which anyone who knew Roronoa Zoro could tell you were definitely not in his personality to run from something. However, all thought of fear disappeared a few minutes later when his mind actually registered what the straw hat wearing teen had said. Something about him joining his crew. Wait. What the hell do you, thunk? A small wooden ladder was placed against the cobblestone wall, and a young girl with brown hair and black-colored eyes hopped over the wall with a tan-colored cloth that she kept close to her chest, which was obviously covering something. She walked up to Zoro happily, not paying any attention to the scowl and accompanying glare she was getting from the pirate hunter. Eat it, kid. Don't you know what happens to people that are caught talking or helping a prisoner? He growled angrily at her, causing her to scrunch her face into a small scowl. I know very well what happens to people that are caught doing such activities, but I don't care. She said bluntly, her facial features quickly transforming to form a cheerful smile as she unraveled the tan cloth to show 2 rice balls. Here, Mr. Zoro, I made some onigiri for you. No thanks, kid. I said that I would survive for a month tied to this pole without any food or water. I've made it this far, and it would be dishonorable for me to break my word. Zoro replied immediately, inciting a frown from the young girl. But Mr. Zoro, you'll die before the month is over if you don't eat. She cried out, hoping to persuade Zoro to eat the onigiri she made. I said no, and that's final, kid. Now get lost. You're an eyesore. Now Zoro, no one likes a bully. Someone snidely said to the left of the two, causing the girl's face to turn a ghastly white and for her to freeze in terror as she turned slowly to the right where the gate was. Walking towards them with arrogant-filled steps was a young man with a melon-shaped head and purple silk coat. A few stern-faced marines circled him, obviously his bodyguards. He walked up to the two of them with a shit-eating grin on his face, eyeing the onigiri the young girl made greedily. Onigiri? Don't mind if I do. He said, grabbing the rice balls out of the girl's hands rudely. The girl, seemingly forgetting about her fear of the man in front of her, shrieked in anger, hey. Those aren't for you. And who are they for then, little girl? If you give them to Zoro, then that is being an accomplice to a criminal. The arrogant young man said as he took a bite of one of the onigiri and immediately spit it out after tasting it. This tastes horrible. It tastes sweet. The young girl twiddled her thumbs together in mild embarrassment and fear as she meekly, I thought it would taste better with sugar. He scowled at her, stupid girl. He shouted as he threw the rice balls on the ground and stomped on them furiously, they're supposed to have salt in them. Not sugar. The boy then turned to one of the marines standing beside him and ordered, you there. Toss this girl out of here. The marine's face paled as he realized what he had to do, and after a few seconds of internal debate in his mind he shakily said, sir, no disrespect, but I cannot do that to this young girl. It is against my morals as a human being. Do you want me to get my father? The condescending teenager retorted furiously, apparently never having his orders questioned before. And then no, sir. The marine replied in utter fear. Then throw her out. The boy snarled back angrily. After a few moments of mental deliberation, the natural human emotion of fear once again overwhelmed the senses of morality and righteousness as the marine stepped up to the girl, his hat shadowing his eyes. He grabbed the back of the girl's shirt and lifted her up with no trouble. He leaned over and spoke in a hushed whisper into her ear, I'm sorry young one, but I have no other choice. Try rolling into a ball, it won't hurt as bad. Of course, he said this so silently that it would practically be impossible for a mere human, other than the recipient, of course, to be able to hear it. However, Luffy was no mere human, so he was able to hear what the marine had whispered perfectly clear. The marine, after whispering this, sent the girl flying over the wall like a speeding bullet. Luffy immediately stood up on the wall and spread his gray, decaying wings. The dark-colored runes covering his body became a lighter shade of red as they began to glow mildly. Luffy jumped up from the wall faster than anyone could see and quickly flew over to the young girl and grabbed her before anyone could even blink. Slowly flying back to the cobblestone wall, he set the young girl down gently on the dirt ground. Are you okay, little one? He asked in a soothing and calm voice, causing her to stop her crying and look up at him with red puffy eyes. Why yeah, I think so. She replied, sniffling in between and in the middle of words as she rubbed her itchy eyes with her arm. That's good to hear young one. Luffy said gently as he patted her head soothingly. My father doesn't wish to see you in his domain for at least a few more decades now, little one, what is your name? His previous sentence both startled and confused the young girl so much that she never heard Luffy ask for her name. Although, she soon became aware of her surroundings and immediately noticed a hand waving in front of her face. She jumped back in surprise, a typical human reaction to surprise. What? She asked Luffy in confusion, to which he just chuckled. Well, young one, I believe I asked your name, Luffy said to her, his voice still filled with gentleness and comfort. Rika, my name is Rika. She replied, hesitantly at first before gaining confidence and finished speaking without stuttering. Rika, that's a lovely name, Luffy said, his voice filled with a softness that Koby never even knew existed. At this comment, Rika's face immediately brightened up. You really think so? Think so, dear, I know so, Luffy replied as he smiled down at her. Then, hearing the footsteps of Marine and the cynical laugh of the bastard child leaving the courtyard, he yelled up to Koby. Koby. This startled the Pincat, who was transfixed watching the interaction between Luffy and Rika. So startled that he almost fell off the wall he was sitting on. Why yes, LL Luffy. He stuttered out. I want you to take this young lady home. I have some rather important business to discuss with Zoro, he said, a dark grin appearing on his face, causing shivers to go up Koby's spine. Granted, he didn't quite know what Luffy had planned for the Marines quite yet, but he knew it couldn't have been something good. So, without hesitating, he started leading the little girl back to her house rather quickly, trying to get away from his newfound but scary friend. Once Koby was a far enough distance away, Luffy jumped over the wall and approached Zoro, who was looking at him with both respect and thankfulness. Thank you for saving that kid back there. I couldn't imagine her getting hurt for trying to help me, he said, a hint of relief in his voice. Well, it's certainly no problem, Zoro, after all, I can't have my first mate feeling guilty the whole time, Luffy replied rather nonchalantly. Wait, what? Zoro said, a look of surprise on his face. First mate? For what? For my pirate crew, silly. After all, a good captain needs an equally good first mate. Luffy said with a small smile. Zoro just stared at the young boy covered in runes for a few moments, processing what he had just heard. It was the most insane thing he had ever heard. This kid wanted him to join his crew, a crew of pirates no less. The fact that this boy wearing a straw hat even had the audacity to ask him that caused him to start chuckling. What's so funny? Luffy asked, lolling his head to the side in confusion. Well, it's funny that someone like you could ask something that stupid to someone like me. Don't you know that I have the nickname the Pirate Hunter for a reason, right? He said, tears beginning to well up in his eyes. Well, Zoro. I believe that you are a good person at heart. After all, you were worried about young Rika back there, so you couldn't be all that bad. I only want good, kind-hearted people on my crew, so I am offering a position to you out of kindness. Plus, you really don't have an option at this point anyway. Luffy said rather matter-of-factly. What do you mean by that? Zoro said, an eyebrow raised in curiosity. Well, I've been told I'm a good judge of characters, Zoro, and my first impressions of that entitled douchebag twat is that he thrives off of pain and suffering. So for him to watch you starve and wilt away until you are nothing but skin and bones gives him about as much satisfaction as a 14-year-old who just discovered an adult magazine in his father's closet. Luffy said, a disgusted look on his face as he said this. Granted, he wasn't disgusted by the inhumane things that little snot-nosed brat was doing, but the fact that he thought he could take his job. Knowing how that little bastard ticks really comes in handy, Zoro. I can tell you for a fact that the day before your sentence is over, he will come out here and execute you just to see your spirit break. That's the way these types of people operate, Zoro, so it's either die by a firing squad or join my pirate crew. The choice is yours. Zoro shivered at those 4 words. It was as if his soul has withered up and died at the sound of his voice. It only took him a few seconds to reach a decision, as anything would be better than dying in this hellhole. Fine. I'll join your crew. But first I need you to go get my sword from that bastard Helmeppo. He took them from me when I started my sentence here. Shy, no problem, Zoro. I'll get your swords back to you in no time flat. Luffy said with a happy grin on his face, taking off his hat and putting on the pirate hunter's head. Keep this safe for me, okay? I don't want it to get messy while I do my thing. Zoro shivered at this, the way it was said so nonchalantly, but with an undertone of foreboding and maliciousness that did not go unnoticed to the green-haired man. Well, I'm off. Luffy shouted, speeding towards the tower of the 153rd Marine Division with a devilish smile on his face and a wicked glint in his eye. Thanks for watching this video. If you really enjoy this video, like, subscribe, and comment down below and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support the Mr. Indigo for writing that awesome fanfic and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.